The third jump of the day didn't feel any different from the first two. The plane climbed, the door opened, cold air filled the cabin, loud enough to drown everything else out. Ivan stood up, he lifted his camera, and he stepped towards the edge of the plane. It's midnight somewhere, and tonight I have a story for you. The airfield ran on routine as it did every single other day. Climb up to altitude, exit the plane, free fall, open your chute, and then land. Ivan McGuire was there to film those jumps. His camera harness pressed across his chest, a compact equipment pack rested between his shoulder blades, and for a veteran skydiver and videographer, the weight of his equipment felt familiar against his back. When everything was on, it felt complete. The kind of setup that you stop thinking about once you've worn it enough times. On the first jump, everybody loaded into the Cessna. The skydivers, the instructors, the plane laboured as it climbed up to altitude with all the weight. And once the pilot gave the nod, Ivan moved towards the open door and stepped out onto the side step of the plane so that he could jump out slightly ahead of the skydiver to get that perfect footage of the skydiver leaving the plane. Ivan jumped free-falling backward with his camera pointing up at the entrance of the plane as he had done many times before. The wind tore past him, the sky swallowed the plane up in front of him, the jumper followed him out, and Ivan kept his lens steady as they fell. They separated, their chutes opened, and everybody landed. On the ground, as per normal, Ivan unclipped his harness so that the ground crew could repack his chute. And while the chutes were being repacked and the plane was getting ready with the next group of skydivers, Ivan reviewed the footage that he'd just taken and made any adjustments that he needed to his camera gear. Now the second jump followed just the same as the first jump's rhythm. The plane took off and it climbed to altitude full of eager divers, packed in like sardines with all their gear. And when the pilot gave the nod, Ivan made his way through all the passengers and all the gear to that familiar position of the step on the side of the plane. He raised his camera and he dropped backwards off the side step of the plane right before the diver exited the plane as well. The same exit, the same framing, another clean separation. Another parachute opening in the distance, another great experience captured on video. Now back on the ground, like usual, used parachutes were unhooked and taken away to be repacked. Harnesses were loosened, helmets came off. Being the perfectionist that Ivan was, during the dive he'd noticed that he needed to make some adjustments to his camera gear. He took off his camera pack that sat on his back and he adjusted the camera rig, tightening a strap that had shifted on the last free fall. He then reviewed the footage that he'd just taken, trying to see if that adjustment that he needed to make had actually interfered with the video of the last jump. Now, while Ivan was viewing that footage, the call came to board the plane again. So while finishing watching the footage, Ivan strapped his camera gear back on, tightened it firmly, and he made his way over to the plane. As the third flight climbed, Ivan focused on his camera because he wanted to get that next reel absolutely perfect. The harness sat tight across his chest, the camera pack pressed against his shoulders on his back, and when the door opened, he stepped forward without any hesitation. He moved out onto the edge of the aircraft like he'd done many times before. The jumper waited behind him, Ivan lifted the camera, and then he let go. Moments later, the jumper followed him out. As they fell and got closer to altitude to pull their chutes, Ivan angled his body away from the jumper with his camera still focused, creating space so that the diver and himself could safely deploy their chutes without getting tangled, and it was the same practice movement that he'd made on the first two jumps before. The moment where he and the camera fade away and the job is done. The moment where the next motion is completely automatic. Once Ivan was safely far enough away, he lowered his camera down and he reached around his back to pull his ripcord. The same motion that he'd done hundreds, if not thousands of times before. And to Ivan's surprise, when he reached around to his back to pull the cord, he couldn't feel it. It wasn't where it normally was supposed to be. Now, thinking that this was quite odd, with the ground fast approaching, Ivan reached around again, thinking that maybe the cord had become tangled on the descent as he was falling backwards out of the plane, but the cord wasn't there. He reached again, nothing. There was no sign of his ripcord. Now, starting to really panic with the ground really starting to close in on Ivan, Ivan had that moment of clarity you have right before disaster hits. That slow motion rewind realization you have where everything plays back in high definition. His stomach sank as he realized what he'd actually done. Now, right before getting onto the plane for that third jump, while watching the footage back of that last jump, Ivan had taken his camera pack off to readjust. Then, when the call was announced to board the plane, he then restrapped his camera pack on, pulled it tight, and in his distracted state, while he was watching that footage, he'd mistaken that secure feeling of his camera pack for the feeling of his parachute. Ivan got on that plane, and when the plane reached altitude and the pilot gave the nod, Ivan walked to the step, dropped out backwards, camera in hand, with no parachute. Ivan's body was later found in a wooded area some distance away from the drop zone. The jump itself had looked normal from the plane. The first two had ended the way that they were supposed to end. The third followed the exact same steps. But distraction and complacency in one of the most dangerous work environments in the world very sadly led to Ivan's third jump being his very last. Until next time, I'll see you at midnight.